There are people who think that just because they were born with a keen aesthetic sense and a drawing board in their hand, they can rewrite the rules of nature. In the case of my neighborhood, this type of person usually has a volunteer position in the neighborhood association and an unhealthy desire to meddle where they don't belong. What happened that Sunday was the kind of thing that, if you tell it out of context, sounds like collective delirium. But it didn't. It happened. I saw it. I lived it. And it was the most absurd, funny, and invigorating thing I've ever witnessed in this community, obsessed with well-cut grass and rehearsed silence. It all started with a post in the HOA group, inviting everyone to our Great Harmony picnic this Sunday. Location: clearing behind the woods. Bring your favorite dishes. It was her voice, disguised under emojis of picnic baskets and butterflies. The problem? That clearing behind the woods was mine. Literally. Fenced, registered, with a deed so clear that even a child could understand it. And it wasn't just any land. It was where my 2 wolves stay. Legalized, registered, accompanied by a biologist, and absolutely respected by the entire state environmental team. The woman knew that. It was impossible not to. There are signs at 3 points on the perimeter warning: private area, animal preservation, entry prohibited without authorization. But she simply ignored it. She thought all she had to do was copy and paste an invitation, and that was it. She had turned an animal sanctuary into a community dessert park. On Sunday, I woke up to a noise that, in a rational world, shouldn't be near my house. The sound of a microphone, instrumental music, excited voices, cymbals crashing, and the ridiculous sound of a glitter globe spinning on top of an inflatable tent. She set up a stage. She placed an artificial carpet on the floor. She hung a banner with the slogan, "Union and Natural Pastures." Even a DJ made an appearance. And as if that wasn't enough, she invited a yoga teacher to lead an outdoor session in the middle of the wolves' territory. 50 people, at least. Children running around, people with dogs, baby strollers, pie plates, everything mixed up, all wrong. By the time I realized it, it was too late for any polite, "Excuse me." I walked over, and the scene was so surreal that for a moment I thought I had stumbled into a parallel universe. She was in the center, wearing a floral dress, giant sunglasses, and a megaphone. She was talking about the importance of sharing idle spaces for community well-being. The delicious detail. She was saying this on top of the warning sign that she herself had kicked over to put up a decorative vase of lavender. She saw me approaching and let out a smile like the kind that comes with poison in it. She said, loud and clear, "There's our neighbor, the owner of this beautiful space that you've kindly provided for our event." I looked at her, then at all the people eating, stomping, recording, dancing, and I had to control myself. Not because of the mess, but because there, on that floor, at that very moment, were the 2 of them. They hadn't shown up yet, but they were nearby. I knew it. Wolves always appear when they sense unusual movement, and what was going on there was a rave disguised as a community get-together. I tried to warn them. I was straightforward. "You've invaded protected wildlife territory. There are 2 breeding wolves in the wild here, legalized, with technical supervision. This is private property." She laughed, a laugh that mixed debauchery with ignorance. She said something like, "Oh, let's not start with exaggerations. Everyone knows you have big dogs." And she spoke into the microphone again, calling the children to the music circle. The anger that rose up was hard to describe, but sometimes the universe has such a perfect sense of justice that it doesn't even need our help. From among the trees, the first howl. Long, guttural, imposing. It silenced the sound of the music in seconds. It was like turning off the world with a scream. People froze. A little boy dropped his glass. One of the dogs started barking desperately. The yoga teacher got stuck in tree pose. And then, the second howl, closer, more powerful. And then they appeared. Majestic, beautiful. 2 large gray wolves. Snouts raised, bodies alert. They didn't run. They didn't growl. They just appeared. And that was it. Chaos ensued. The second the wolves crossed the clearing, everything collapsed. The ground seemed to have sunk beneath the feet of those 50 pie and detox juice invaders. No one there knew how to react, because they weren't prepared, because they had been fed the absurd idea that nature bends to the HOA. And there was the glaring proof that it doesn't. The wolves didn't run. They didn't need to. They walked as if they knew the terrain, as if they knew they were home. One of them, the largest, stopped in the center of the lawn where a dance circle had been forming and just watched. The other, younger, sniffed the air and walked towards a checkered tablecloth covered with jars of vegan pâté, a portable speaker, and a jar of cookies with a handmade sign that said, "Gluten-free, guilt-free." The yoga teacher fell, sitting down. A man knocked over the cooler trying to run. People tried to climb trees. A lady shouted, "It's a wolf from hell," before fainting over a plate of quiche. And the music? It stopped with a pathetic squeal as the DJ, a teenager hired just for Instagram, dropped his equipment and ran off without looking back. The woman, even in the midst of the chaos, tried to maintain her pose. She stood there, holding the megaphone as if it would scare the animals away. She spoke loudly. "Stay calm. Don't make any sudden movements. This is a misunderstanding." But no one listened, because the survival instinct always shouts louder than the tone of voice of voluntary authority. My father appeared from the side of the house, with an expression somewhere between, "This is going to lead to a lawsuit," and, finally, Sunday got interesting. He didn't say anything. He just crossed his arms and watched, with the kind of patience that only those who have seen worse can maintain. His gaze went straight to the wolves. He nodded slightly. It was as if he was saying, "Stay calm, kids. These tourists will go away soon." And that's exactly what started to happen. In a matter of minutes, half the guests were already fleeing, people tripping over each other, dropping bags, food, plastic cups. A man abandoned his bicycle. A woman dropped her comfort baby, empty, thank God. And in the middle of the improvised trail back to the parking lot, someone shouted, "Call the police," without realizing that the local police, with real badges, lived right there. The wolves stood still, watching. Not a single aggressive movement. They were calm, serene. They were just curious. But collective ignorance turns everything into panic, and what was supposed to be a social gathering turned into an involuntary gourmet neighborhood horror movie performance. That's when she lost control for good. The woman, who until then had been trying to control the group, was cornered by her own creation. One of the residents, the same one who always brought a tray of brownies to HOA meetings, turned to her and said, "You said this was a community area. Why do you have wolves?" She tried to explain, mumbling something about ecological misunderstanding, but at that point, no one else wanted to hear it. What was once adoration turned to fury. They shouted. They pointed. They said she had put everyone at risk. Someone threatened to call a lawyer. Another pulled out his cell phone to record for the city's reporting channel. And she finally seemed to realize how much trouble she was in. She tried to leave with what was left of her dignity. She picked up the megaphone, grabbed a basket of fruit that hadn't been knocked over yet, and walked off down the gravel path, pretending not to hear the booing, the barking of one of the dogs lost in the undergrowth, or the third, louder, more serious howl coming from somewhere behind the trees. On the ground, pieces of the party remained, torn towels, plastic forks, a poster with the words, "Celebrating community with respect and joy," and a cooler still full of green juice. Later, with everything cleaned up, the wildlife inspector who monitors the wolves showed up. He said he'd seen the movement on the cameras and came to check it out. He looked at the ground, looked at the wolves that had already returned to the shelter, and commented, "They only came to see the mess. These animals are more curious than aggressive." My father replied, "They're more civilized than a lot of people in this neighborhood." The inspector laughed. He wrote something down on his tablet and left. That day, no one showed up at the site again, nor the next day, nor the following week. The HOA was silent. It didn't post anything, No apology, no explanation, no emails with digital safety pamphlets. Just the uncomfortable emptiness of someone who has realized that they are no longer in charge, not even of their own power fantasy. The following days were a silent spectacle of collective embarrassment. The woman disappeared from the streets, from the HOA networks, from the corridors of the community club where she used to circulate with her briefcase full of printed bulletins and bad ideas. No one saw her, no one mentioned her, but everyone knew. The video of the picnic collapsing under the watchful eyes of the wolves had escaped the local group and was already circulating neighborhood forums, WhatsApp groups in neighboring towns, and even appeared on a YouTube reaction channel with the title, "Karen Tries to Picnic in Wolf Territory. Regret in Real Time." In the video, you can see her trying to keep control while a lady rolls around with a plate of salad in her hand and a child screams, "The wolves will eat the juice," in absolute panic. The climax is when she turns around, faces the camera and says, "They're tame, right?" And then the larger of the two animals slowly appeared behind her, like a four-legged shadow, dragging the pride of others along the ground. After that, the invitations to events disappeared. The HOA meetings were led by another resident, a guy who had only shown up to complain that the streetlights were dim, but who now led the meetings with the tone of someone who knew that the last thing the neighborhood wanted was more chaos disguised as unity. Even with all this free fall, she couldn't keep quiet for long. A few days after the fiasco, a new notice appeared pasted on the post office wall. No signature, but the writing style, the type of recycled paper scented with lavender essence, and the terms such as "rescue of the joint valorization proposal" gave it all away. It was her. The document talked about redirecting community sentiment towards the axis of visual collaboration and, of course, proposed a new event. This time, a meditative walk through the collective green. It suggested that residents take a light trail. Guess where? Exactly. On the edge of the same plot of land she tried to invade with pâtés and yoga mats. The proposal was a joke. Most of the residents ignored it. Some laughed. A bolder one drew a wolf on the corner of the paper and wrote, "We meditate, they howl." Someone stuck a sign above it, "Event suspended for obvious reasons." Even so, she insisted. She tried sending out a newsletter, using a mass mailing tool she had learned in an online local impact leadership course. She sent a huge text, positioning herself as the victim of an environmental misunderstanding, blaming shared misinformation, and trying to argue that nature should not be privatized when it is within the emotional perimeter of the community. It was so ridiculous that one resident responded with a single sentence, "Emotional parameter is not jurisdiction." The most painful thing for her, however, was not the contempt. It was the wolves' new status. Yes, they have become local celebrities. The town hall, after being called in to check the situation, not only recognized the legality of the breeding, but also recommended that the land be included in the educational route of schools in the region. The wolves were now part of an educational project on responsible wildlife. They had a name, public veterinary records, and an exclusive space on the county website, with information about their routine, diet, and care. Even worse, the elementary school held a drawing competition about the guardians of the forest. The winner was a 7-year-old boy who drew the two wolves in front of a fallen sign with the words, "No picnicking allowed." The drawing was made into a mural at the entrance to the school. She was forced to watch all this while keeping her mouth shut, which was clearly something she had never practiced in her life. Even the neighborhood dogs started howling at night, as if in involuntary solidarity. One neighbor swore that her pug had been imitating wolves since that day. Another said that her cockatiel could no longer hear the word picnic without screaming. The woman, now reduced to a spectator of her own ruin, only walked around wearing a cap, sunglasses, and a posture so shrunken that she seemed to have lost half her height. People still said hello out of politeness, but The conversation died there. She passed by, and the conversation died down. It was as if she was carrying a field of silence with her, a walking reminder of what happens when you ignore warning signs and life's signals. In the yard of my house, my father installed a new sign, simpler and more direct: private territory. Wolves do not attack, but their ego is sensitive. The sign went viral more than the original video. No one else dared to set foot there without knocking on the door first. In the last week of September, when the weather began to change and the leaves were falling like someone getting rid of the burden of enduring the whole summer, the neighborhood seemed to have become something else. The grass grew without being measured by invisible rulers. Children played on the sidewalks again without fear of warnings in the form of notes. Dogs barked without being warned. Even the wind seemed less controlled, as if nature had finally defeated the aesthetic committee of oppression. She, on the other hand, walked like a shadow of herself. The big cap, the sunglasses even when the sun wasn't shining, the clothes always too closed for someone who spent her time preaching visual freedom. She was the living portrait of denial. She continued to frequent public places, but with the posture of someone who knows she's no longer invited to anything. The looks on the neighbors' faces ranged from pity to contempt. No one had forgotten the video of the picnic. It kept popping up all over the web, appearing out of nowhere like that inconvenient cousin who shows up just to remind you that yes, it did happen. She tried, in yet another desperate act, to start a petition. It said that the presence of wolves in the neighborhood created an intimidating energy dissonant with the community spirit. It claimed that some residents developed sleep disorders caused by symbolic howling. It even appealed to the old "what if it was your children" argument, which caused more laughter than indignation. Few people signed it. Most ignored it. A neighbor who had participated in the picnic event and was still ashamed of having knocked over the lasagna dish as she ran away, wrote on the sheet, "I support the wolves. At least they're not a nuisance." The phrase became a meme. Someone printed it out, laminated it, and stuck it on a pole in the main street. The last straw was when a local TV program decided to do a story on wild animals living in urban areas. They contacted me, asked me to visit the property, meet the wolves, and understand what it meant to have legalized breeding. The story was light, well-produced. It showed the two animals calm, well cared for, walking in their own space with the full control of the technical team. When the reporter asked if there had ever been any problems, I just replied with a calm smile, "Only with humans." The video aired. 2 days later, the residents painted a banner with the words, "Community Pride, Our Wolves, Our Balance." They tied it up at the entrance to the neighborhood. The woman drove past slowly, looked and accelerated. For the first time, she didn't stop to say anything. That same evening, she removed her belongings from the small makeshift office she still kept in the garage. The folding table, the old printer that spat out flyers, the files with neighborhood behavioral restructuring plans. He kept everything in silence. The movement was discreet, but everyone noticed. It was the undeclared end of his community crusade. On Sunday, a group of residents held a picnic, this time in the city's official park, with a permit, limited space, and no attempt to re-educate the environment. They brought towels, homemade food, and some speakers. They invited me. I politely declined. I prefer the view from my backyard, the shade of the trees, the light sound of swaying branches. I was content to watch the scene from afar, everyone laughing, with no rehearsed posture. One boy was wearing a t-shirt with a wolf print and the words "VIP guest at the wrong picnic." The two wolves were resting at that moment. One lay under the sun, the other licked his paw, with the tranquility of someone who knows that the world around him, for the first time, doesn't want to interfere. The eldest raised his head and let out a soft howl, as if he were having a muffled laugh. The sound echoed across the field, and someone from the group in the distance responded with an imitated howl, clumsy but sincere, an attempt at connection, perhaps a collective apology for for the day they decided to turn sacred territory into an invasive neighbor's buffet. There were no more extraordinary HOA meetings. There were no more attempts to reinstate the leadership. The position the woman held has been dissolved, replaced by a symbolic rotation of residents who, at most, warn when there's a hole in the asphalt or a lamppost flashing. Nobody hands out leaflets anymore. No one tries to measure the time others spend sitting on the balcony. She still lives in the neighborhood, but now she's just another person behind the curtains. She doesn't lead, she doesn't give opinions, she doesn't command, she just watches. And perhaps, deep down, she has learned that you can't invade what you don't understand, that there are spaces that weren't made to be adorned with recycled paper banners, that not every corner needs a meeting. Some just need respect and silence. And if she ever forgets, the howl in the late afternoon will be there as a reminder. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.